The Valorian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had conquered 3 million worlds and made slaves of hundreds of species. Their ships were the fastest. Their weapons were the deadliest. No one had ever defeated them in war. But there was one planet they had never touched. One world that sat alone in the dark corner of the galaxy, marked in their records with a warning that made even the bravest commanders turn away. Earth, Class Omega hostile. Do not approach. Commander Xyreth stood on the bridge of his scout ship and looked at the blue and green world spinning slowly in the darkness. His 4 eyes blinked one after another as he read the data on his screen. He had seen many terrible places in his long life, but nothing like this. The planet had an atmosphere filled with oxygen. This gas could make things burn without warning. One small spark could create a fire that would spread for miles. The natives breathed this poison every moment of their lives. The world also moved in a strange way. It tilted as it went around its sun. This created something the natives called seasons. In some places, the temperature dropped so low that water turned to ice, and the land became a frozen desert where nothing could survive. In other places, the heat became so strong that it could kill a Valorian in minutes. But the temperature was not the worst part. The planet had storms that could tear buildings apart. It had earthquakes that split the ground open and swallowed entire cities. It had mountains that exploded with liquid fire. It had waves in the ocean that rose higher than the tallest ships and crashed down on the shore with the force of 1,000 bombs. And then there were the creatures. Earth was filled with predators, animals with sharp teeth and claws that hunted and killed each other without mercy, snakes that carried poison strong enough to stop a heart, insects that spread diseases, fish in the ocean that could bite through metal. But the smallest creatures were the most dangerous of all. The natives called them germs and viruses. They were too small to see, but they were everywhere, in the air, in the water, in the food. They invaded the body and multiplied until their host died in agony. Billions of these invisible killers floated in every breath. Science Officer Thalia walked to stand beside Xyreth. Her skin was pale and almost see-through. And it changed colors when she felt strong emotions. Right now, it was flickering with patterns of yellow and orange. She was afraid. "The data is correct," she said. "This world should not have any life at all. It is too hostile, too violent, too unpredictable." "And yet there are natives," Xyreth replied. "Billions of them." "Yes. They call themselves humans. They have lived on this world for over 200,000 years. Xyreth turned to look at her. "How is that possible?" Thalia shook her head. "I do not know. By every measure we have, they should have died out long ago. But instead, they have spread across the entire planet. They live in the frozen lands. They live in the burning deserts. They live on islands surrounded by deadly water. They have even begun to leave their world and build small colonies on other planets nearby. What do they look like?" Thalia pulled up an image on the screen. Xyreth studied the creature that appeared. It was small compared to a Valorian. It stood on 2 legs and had 2 arms. Its body was soft and had no armor or scales. Its skin came in different shades of brown and pink. It had flat teeth in the front and only small, sharp ones in the back. Its claws were tiny and dull. "This is what survives on that death world?" Xyreth asked with disbelief. "Yes, Commander. They are surprisingly fragile. They can be killed by falls, by cuts, by temperature, by countless diseases, and yet they continue to live and grow in numbers." A message came through from the Valorian homeworld. Xyreth read it and felt his heart sink. The war against the Kreth Dominion had been going badly. The Empire needed resources. They needed the rare metals that lay beneath the surface of Earth. High Admiral Vorath had decided to invade. Xyreth sent back a warning. He described the hostile environment. He explained the dangers. He begged the Admiral to choose a different target. The response came quickly. High Admiral Vorath did not care about the warnings. The humans were primitive. They had only recently learned how to travel in space. Their weapons were old and simple. The invasion would be easy. 3 days at most. Xyreth read the message and felt something he had never felt before in all his years of service. He felt doubt. Far below, on the surface of the forbidden world, life went on as normal. In a small town called Ridgemont, a man named Jake Sullivan was sitting by a lake with his daughter Chloe. The sun was warm and the sky was clear. Birds sang in the trees and fish jumped in the water. Jake was a big man with strong arms and kind eyes. He had been a Marine for 20 years before he retired. He had fought in wars and seen terrible things. But now he lived a quiet life. He worked at a hardware store in town and spent his free time with his daughter. Chloe was 12 years old. She had her mother's brown hair and her father's stubborn spirit. She was trying to learn how to fish, but she kept getting the line tangled. "Dad, I cannot do this," she said with frustration. Jake laughed and took the rod from her hands. "You can do anything, Chloe. You just have to keep trying. That is what being human means." "We never give up." He showed her how to cast the line again. She watched carefully and then tried it herself. This time, the hook flew out over the water and landed with a small splash. "I did it!" she shouted. "See? I told you!" Jake put his arm around her shoulders. "Remember this feeling. When things get hard, remember that you can always find a way." Chloe smiled and watched her line float on the water. She had no idea that in a few short hours, her world would change forever. High above the Earth, the Valorian invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace. 12 massive warships filled with 50,000 soldiers. They had come to conquer a primitive world and take its resources. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The sky turned red as the Valorian ships began their attack. Bright beams of energy shot down from space and hit the ground with terrible force. Military bases exploded in balls of fire. Airports turned to ash. Ships in harbors melted like ice in summer. In cities around the world, people looked up and saw death falling from the clouds. High Admiral Vorath sat on his command throne and watched the destruction with cold satisfaction. His scales were dark green and his eyes glowed with the light of conquest. He had won many battles in his long career. This one would be the easiest of all. "Report," he ordered. The officer beside him bowed low. "We have destroyed 60% of their military strength, Admiral. Their defenses are broken. They cannot fight back." "Excellent. Begin ground deployment." "I want this planet under control before the next sunrise." Thousands of drop pods fell from the ships like metal rain. They crashed into fields and streets and parks. The doors opened and Valorian soldiers marched out with their weapons ready. They were terrifying to look at. Each one stood over 8 feet tall with thick scales covering their bodies. They had 4 arms and 4 eyes. Their armor was made from a special metal that could stop any energy weapon. They had conquered 100 worlds and never lost a single battle. They expected the humans to run. They expected them to hide. They expected them to beg for mercy. They were wrong. In Ridgemont, Jake heard the explosions and saw the red light in the sky. He grabbed Chloe and ran to the underground shelter that his neighbor had built years ago. The shelter was deep and strong. It would keep her safe. "Stay here," he told her. "Do not come out until I come back for you." Chloe grabbed his arm. Her eyes were full of tears. "Dad, where are you going?" "I have to help, sweetheart. There are people out there who need me." "But what if you do not come back?" Jake knelt down and looked into her eyes. "I will always come back for you. I promise. Now be brave for me." He kissed her forehead and closed the shelter door. Then he went back to his house and opened the safe in his bedroom. Inside was the rifle he had carried during his years as a Marine. He had hoped he would never need it again. He loaded the weapon and filled his pockets with ammunition. Then he walked out into the burning streets of his town and headed toward the sound of fighting. The first Valorians he found were a squad of 5 soldiers. They were standing over the body of an old man who had tried to run away. They were laughing in their strange, clicking language. Jake felt anger rise in his chest, cold, hard anger that pushed away all fear. He raised his rifle and fired. The bullet hit the first soldier in the chest. The alien looked down at the hole in his armor with confusion. Purple blood poured from the wound. He fell to the ground and did not move again. The other soldiers spun around in shock. Their energy weapons came up, glowing with deadly light. But Jake was already moving. He rolled behind a burned car and fired again. Another soldier dropped. "What is this?" one of them shouted. "What weapon is this?" They had never seen anything like it. Their armor was designed to stop plasma and laser beams. It had never been tested against simple metal bullets fired at high speed. The primitive human weapon punched through their protection like it was not even there. Jake fired twice more. 2 more soldiers fell. The last one turned and ran. Jake let him go. He wanted the alien to tell the others what had happened. He wanted them to be afraid. The soldier ran all the way back to his drop pod and called for help. His voice was shaking as he made his report. "They are fighting back. They have weapons that go through our armor. They killed my entire squad." The commander who received the message did not believe him at first. How could primitive creatures with primitive weapons kill trained Valorian soldiers? It had to be a mistake. But more reports came in. From every landing zone, from every city, from every country on the planet. The humans were not surrendering. They were fighting. And they were winning. Not all of them. Most humans had no weapons and no training. They hid in their homes and prayed for safety. But there were enough fighters to make a difference. Veterans like Jake who remembered how to kill, hunters who knew how to use rifles, police officers who stood their ground against impossible enemies. And something else surprised the Valorians even more than the weapons. The humans were not afraid. Every other species in the galaxy felt fear when faced with death. It was natural. It was logical. When you know you cannot win, you surrender or run away. That is how intelligent creatures survive. But humans were different. They kept fighting even when there was no hope. They died with weapons in their hands and defiance in their eyes. They protected strangers as if they were family. They sacrificed themselves so that others could live. The Valorians did not understand this. They had conquered many worlds and seen many species. None of them had ever acted this way. Jake spent the night moving through Ridgemont, killing every alien he found. By morning, he had freed half the town. Survivors began to gather around him. They asked him what to do. "We fight," he told them simply. "We fight until they leave or until we die. Those are the only choices." A young woman stepped forward. Her name was Megan Holloway. She had worked as a nurse at the local hospital before the attack. Her white uniform was stained with blood and ash, but her eyes were clear and strong. "I can help," she said. "I can treat the wounded. I can teach others basic medicine." Jake nodded. "Good. We will need medics. We will need everyone." He looked at the small group of survivors, old men and young women, children and grandparents. None of them were soldiers, but all of them were human. "I will not lie to you," Jake said. "Many of us will not survive this. The enemy is bigger and stronger and has better technology. By every measure, we should lose." He paused and let those words sink in. "But we are not going to lose. Do you know why? Because we have something they do not have. We have this world. This harsh, deadly, beautiful world that has been trying to kill us since the beginning of time. And we are still here. We survived everything Earth threw at us. And we will survive this too." The people listening felt something change inside them. The fear was still there, but it was smaller now. Something else was growing in its place, something that had kept humanity alive through ice ages and plagues and wars. Hope. 2 weeks passed since the invasion began. The world had changed forever. Cities lay in ruins. Governments had collapsed. Millions of people were dead or missing. The Valorian soldiers controlled most of the major roads and ports. They had set up bases in every country and were forcing humans to work in the mines, digging up the precious metals that the Empire wanted. But the aliens were not winning. Not really. In the forests and mountains and abandoned buildings, the survivors were fighting back. Small groups of resistance fighters struck at night and disappeared before dawn. They destroyed supply lines, they killed patrols, they rescued prisoners. And they followed the example of one man who had become a legend, Jake Sullivan, the Devil of Ridgemont. The Valorians had given him that name because they did not know what else to call him. He appeared from nowhere and killed without mercy. He could not be caught, he could not be stopped. He moved through their lines like a ghost and left only death behind. The truth was simpler than any legend. Jake was just a man who refused to give up. He sat in the basement of an old factory on the edge of town. Around him were the fighters he had gathered over the past 2 weeks. There were about 50 of them now, young and old, men and women. Some had been soldiers, most had not, but all of them had learned how to fight. Megan Holloway sat nearby, wrapping a bandage around the arm of a teenager who had been hurt in the last raid. Her hands moved with quick skill. She had saved many lives since joining the resistance. "How is he?" Jake asked. "He will be fine," Megan replied. "The cut is not deep. He just needs rest." The teenager looked embarrassed. His name was Danny, and he was only 17 years old. He wanted to prove himself, but he was still learning. "I am sorry," Danny said. "I moved too slow." Jake shook his head. "You did fine. You are alive. That means you did not make any real mistakes." A man in his 30s walked over to join them. His name was Derek Vance. Before the invasion, he had been a high school history teacher. Now he helped Jake plan their operations. He was smart and calm, and he understood how wars were won. "I have news," Derek said quietly. "Our scouts found a Valorian supply depot about 10 miles north. Light security. Maybe 20 guards." Jake looked at the rough map they had drawn on the floor. "What kind of supplies?" "Food, medical equipment, ammunition for their weapons." Derek paused. "And prisoners. About 30 humans they captured from the next town over." The room went silent. Everyone knew what happened to prisoners. The Valorians worked them in the mines until they died from exhaustion. Some were taken away for experiments. None of them ever came back. "We hit them tonight," Jake said. "Derek, plan the attack. I want 3 teams, 1 to take out the guards, 1 to free the prisoners, 1 to grab as many supplies as we can carry." Derek nodded and went to work. Megan came to stand beside Jake. She spoke softly so the others would not hear. "You have not slept in 2 days. You need to rest." Jake shook his head. "I will rest when this is over." "You will collapse before this is over. And then what? These people need you alive, Jake. You cannot help anyone if you kill yourself with exhaustion." He looked at her and saw the worry in her eyes. She was right, and he knew it. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of people he could not save. He saw his daughter in that shelter, waiting for him to come back. "I cannot stop," he said. "Not yet." Megan sighed but did not argue further. She understood. They all understood. This was what humans did. They pushed themselves beyond any reasonable limit because there was no other choice. The attack that night was a success. Jake led the first team himself. They crept through the darkness until they were close enough to see the alien guards standing around the depot. The Valorians had good night vision, but they were not used to enemies who moved as quietly as shadows. Jake raised his hand and gave the signal. 3 shots rang out almost at the same time. 3 guards fell. Before the others could react, the second team burst in from the other side and opened fire. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, all 20 guards were dead, and not a single human had been seriously hurt. They found the prisoners locked in metal cages at the back of the depot, 30 men and women in torn clothes, their eyes wide with fear and hope. When they realized they were being rescued, some of them began to cry. "Who are you?" one woman asked Jake as he broke open her cage. "Just a man," he replied. "Now let's go. We need to move fast." They took everything they could carry and disappeared into the night. By the time Valorian reinforcements arrived, there was nothing left but bodies and empty cages. Word of the raid spread quickly. Other resistance groups heard about the Devil of Ridgemont and his fighters. They began to copy his tactics. They began to win their own small victories. High Admiral Vorath was furious. "Find him," he screamed at his commanders. "Find this human and bring him to me. I will make an example of him that the entire planet will remember." But finding Jake Sullivan was not easy. He never stayed in one place for more than a night. He knew every street and building in Ridgemont. He knew the forests and the rivers and the hidden paths through the hills. This was his home, and he used every part of it against the invaders. The Valorians tried to set traps. They failed. They tried to bribe informers. None came forward. They tried to torture prisoners for information. The prisoners died without speaking. Science Officer Thalia studied the reports and finally understood something important about humans. "They are pack creatures," she told the Admiral. "They form bonds of loyalty that are stronger than their fear of death. They will not betray each other because, to them, that would be worse than dying." Vorath stared at her. "That is madness." "Perhaps, or perhaps it is what makes them so dangerous." Back in the factory basement, Jake was looking at a new face. A young woman named Katie Mills had arrived with news from the south. She was a farmer who had been hiding Valorian deserters on her property. "Deserters?" Jake asked with surprise. Katie nodded. "Some of them do not want to fight anymore. They say this invasion is wrong. One of them wants to meet with you. He says he can help." This was unexpected. Jake had never imagined that any of the aliens would turn against their own kind. "What is his name?" "He calls himself Kythos." Jake thought about it for a long moment. It could be a trap, but it could also be the opportunity they needed. The Resistance had won many small battles, but they could not defeat the entire invasion force on their own. They needed something more. "Bring him to me," Jake said finally. "But keep him blindfolded until he gets here. I want to look him in the eyes before I decide if I trust him." Katie left to arrange the meeting. Megan came to stand beside Jake again. "Do you think he is telling the truth?" "I do not know," Jake admitted. "But we have to find out. We cannot win this war by ourselves." 3 months had passed since the Valorian ships first appeared in the sky. The invasion was falling apart. What was supposed to be an easy conquest had turned into a nightmare. Valorian soldiers were dying every day. Supply lines were cut faster than they could be repaired. Entire bases had been abandoned as the aliens pulled back to defend their main landing zones. Across the world, humanity was rising. Resistance cells had formed in every country. They shared information through hidden radio networks and messengers who traveled on foot through dangerous territory. They learned from each other. When one group found a weakness in Valorian armor, every group knew about it within days. And at the center of it all was Jake Sullivan. He stood in what had once been a school gymnasium. It was now the headquarters of the North American Resistance. Over 2,000 fighters answered to him directly, and thousands more followed his example from afar. Derek Vance pointed at the large map spread across the floor. Red marks showed Valorian positions. Blue marks showed human forces. There was a lot more blue than there had been 3 months ago. "They are consolidating," Derek said. "Pulling back from the smaller towns and villages. They cannot control the countryside anymore." Jake nodded slowly. He had lost weight over the past months. His beard had grown long and his eyes had deep shadows under them, but his voice was still strong and his mind was still sharp. "They are scared," Jake said. "They came here thinking we would break. Instead, we broke them." A woman named Sarah Torres spoke up. She was the leader of a resistance cell from California who had traveled across the country to coordinate with Jake. "What about the ships in orbit? As long as they have those, they can bomb us whenever they want." It was a good question. The resistance had won the ground war, but the battle for the sky was a different matter. Human weapons could not reach the Valorian fleet. They were safe up there, looking down at the planet they had tried to conquer. "We are working on that," Jake replied. He looked across the room to where Kethos sat alone on a wooden bench. The Valorian deserter had proven himself over the past weeks. He had provided information about enemy positions and patrol schedules. He had explained how Valorian technology worked and how to break it. He had saved human lives, but many people still did not trust him. He was one of the invaders. His people had killed millions of humans. Some thought he should be executed rather than helped. Jake had disagreed. He believed that even enemies could become friends if they were given the chance. That was another thing that made humans different from other species in the galaxy. Kethos stood up and walked to the map. His 4 eyes moved across the surface, studying the positions marked there. "Your people have done well," he said in his clicking accent. "Better than anyone in the Empire would have believed possible." "But it is not enough," Jake replied. "We can hurt them on the ground. We cannot touch them in space." Kethos was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke words that changed everything. "There is a way. The Orbital Defense Network. It is designed to protect the fleet from outside attacks. But with the right access codes, it could be turned against the ships themselves." The room went completely silent. "You have these codes?" Derek asked. "I was a pilot before I deserted. I know the security systems. I can get the codes, but I will need to reach a Valorian communication terminal. There is one at the main base, 30 miles east of here." Jake looked at the map. The main base was heavily defended. Hundreds of soldiers, energy shields, automated weapons. It would be almost impossible to attack. Almost. How many people would we need? Kethos calculated in his head. A small team, 5 or 6 at most. Any more would be noticed. We would need to move fast and quiet. Sarah shook her head. "This is crazy. Even if you get inside, how do you get out again?" "Maybe we do not," Jake said quietly. Everyone stared at him. "Some missions are more important than the people who carry them out. If we can turn those weapons against the fleet, we win the war. Even if none of us come back, it would be worth it." Megan stepped forward. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "Then I am going with you. You will need a medic." "Megan, no. I need you here. You need me there more. You know I am right." Jake wanted to argue, but he saw the determination in her eyes. She had made up her mind. Nothing he said would change it. "Fine. Derek, you are in charge while we are gone. Keep the pressure on. Do not let them rest." Derek nodded. His throat was tight, but he did not let his fear show. "Be careful, Jake. Come back if you can." "I will try." They left that night. Jake, Megan, Kethos, and 3 other fighters who had volunteered. They moved through the darkness like shadows, avoiding patrols and security checkpoints. It took 2 days to reach the outer edge of the Valorian base. They watched from a hill overlooking the massive complex. Energy shields shimmered around the perimeter. Guards walked in regular patterns. Lights swept across the ground in search of intruders. "There," Kethos said, pointing to a small building near the center of the base. "The communication terminal is inside. Once I reach it, I can upload a virus that will give us control of the orbital weapons." "How long do you need?" 5 minutes. Maybe less. Jake studied the layout. 5 minutes was a very long time when you were surrounded by enemies. We go in 2 teams. I take Megan and Kethos through the main gate. The others create a distraction on the south side. Draw as many guards away as you can. One of the volunteers, a young man named Eddie Parker, looked worried. What if we cannot draw enough away? Then we improvise. That is what humans do best. They waited until the middle of the night, when the guards were most tired and most likely to make mistakes. Then they moved. The distraction team hit the south wall with everything they had. Explosions lit up the darkness. Alarms started screaming. Guards ran toward the noise, leaving their posts empty. Jake led his team through a gap in the perimeter. They ran low and fast, staying in the shadows between buildings. A guard appeared around a corner, and Jake killed him before he could raise his weapon. They kept moving. The communication building was just ahead. Kethos ran to the terminal and began working. His 4 hands moved across the controls faster than human eyes could follow. 2 minutes, he said. Jake heard footsteps outside. A lot of them. They found us. Megan, watch the door. Megan raised her rifle and waited. The door burst open, and Valorian soldiers poured through. She fired again and again, dropping the first 3 before they could enter. But more were coming. Jake moved beside her and added his fire to hers. Bodies piled up in the doorway. Purple blood covered the floor. Still they came. 1 minute, Kethos called. A plasma bolt hit the wall near Jake's head. He felt the heat burn his skin but did not stop shooting. Another bolt hit Megan in the shoulder, and she screamed but kept firing. Done, Kethos shouted. Outside, in orbit high above the Earth, the Valorian warships suddenly found their own weapons turning against them. Defense cannons that were meant to protect them began to fire at their engines, their shields, their life support systems. 4 ships exploded in the first minute. 3 more were crippled beyond repair. The remaining vessels broke formation and fled toward open space, their commanders screaming in confusion and terror. On the ground, the soldiers attacking the communication building stopped and looked up as bright flashes lit the sky. They saw their fleet dying. Jake saw his chance. He grabbed Megan and ran. Kethos followed. The surviving volunteers met them outside the perimeter, and they disappeared into the woods before anyone could organize a pursuit. They had done it. The Valorian fleet was broken. The invasion was over. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Earth had won. The primitive planet that everyone thought would fall in 3 days had defeated the most powerful military force in known space. The Valorian Empire, which had ruled unchallenged for 10,000 years, had been humiliated by creatures who still fought with chemical weapons and metal bullets. On 100 worlds, oppressed species heard the news and dared to hope. If the humans could win, maybe they could too. Rebellions that had been crushed for centuries began to stir again. Slaves whispered to each other in the darkness. Leaders who had given up began to make new plans. Everything was changing. The Galactic Council met for the first time in 200 years. Representatives from over 400 species gathered in a massive chamber on a neutral space station. They had come to discuss one thing: what to do about Earth. Some wanted to destroy the humans before they became a threat. Others wanted to make alliances with them. A few simply wanted to study them and understand how such a primitive species could have accomplished the impossible. They decided to send a message. They would invite human representatives to address the council. Let them speak for themselves. Let the galaxy see what these strange creatures really were. On Earth, the survivors were still counting their dead. The invasion had killed over 50 million people. Cities lay in ruins. Entire regions had no power or clean water. The work of rebuilding would take decades. But humans did not wait for perfect conditions before getting started. That was not their way. Within days of the Valorian retreat, people were clearing rubble and planting crops. Hospitals were being rebuilt, schools were reopening. Life was returning to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after the end of the world. Jake Sullivan wanted no part of what came next. He had done his duty. He had fought and bled and watched friends die. Now he wanted to go home. He wanted to see his daughter. He wanted to sit by the lake and fish and pretend that the past 4 months had been nothing but a bad dream. But the newly formed Earth Defense Coalition had other ideas. President Maria Vasquez came to see him personally. She was a former senator who had survived the invasion by hiding in a bunker beneath Washington. Now she led the emergency government that was trying to hold humanity together. "The Galactic Council wants to meet us," she told Jake. "They want to understand what happened here. They want to see who we are." Jake shook his head. "Send someone else. A diplomat, a scientist, someone who knows how to talk to aliens." "They do not want diplomats. They want to see the person who defeated the Valorians. They want to see you." "I am just a soldier." "You are a symbol," Vasquez replied. "Like it or not, you represent everything that makes humanity special. Our strength, our determination, our refusal to give up. The galaxy needs to see that." Jake thought about his daughter waiting for him in Ridgemont. He thought about all the quiet days he had dreamed of during the war. He thought about how much he did not want to travel across the galaxy and speak to creatures he did not understand. But he also thought about the future. Not just his future, but the future of every human being on Earth. They were not alone anymore. They were part of something bigger now, and someone had to speak for them. "Fine," he said finally. "I will go." The journey to the Galactic Council station took 3 weeks. Jake traveled on a captured Valorian ship that human engineers had learned to operate. Megan came with him as his medical advisor. Kythos came as his translator and guide. When they arrived, Jake was overwhelmed by what he saw. The station was larger than any city on Earth. It floated in the darkness between stars, glowing with lights of every color. Ships from 100 worlds came and went like insects around a hive. Species he had never imagined filled the corridors. Some had scales, some had feathers, some had no solid form at all. Everyone stared at the humans as they passed. "They are afraid of you," Kythos said quietly. Jake found that hard to believe. "Afraid? We are the smallest things here. Size means nothing. You defeated the Valorians. No one has ever done that before. They do not know what you might do next." They were led to the council chamber. It was a vast circular room with seats rising in tiers around a central platform. 400 species watched as Jake walked to the middle and stood alone beneath the lights. He had not prepared any speech. He did not know what to say, so he simply spoke from his heart. "We did not ask for this war," he began. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. "We did not want to fight anyone. We were happy on our world, living our lives, raising our children. But the Valorians came and gave us no choice." The chamber was completely silent. "They burned our cities. They killed our people. They thought we would surrender because that is what every other species does when faced with overwhelming force. But they did not understand us. They did not understand what Earth has made us." Jake paused and looked around at the alien faces watching him. "Our world is not easy. It tries to kill us every day. Storms and earthquakes and diseases and predators. Nothing survives on Earth unless it is strong. Nothing thrives unless it is brave. We have been fighting for our lives since we first opened our eyes, and we will keep fighting until we close them for the last time." He took a deep breath. The Valorians thought Earth was hell. They were right. But they forgot something important. Hell has no power over those who were born there. We are the children of that hell. We carry it inside us. It makes us stubborn. It makes us dangerous. But it also makes us kind, because we know what it means to suffer. A murmur ran through the crowd. Jake waited for it to quiet. "We did not come here to threaten you. We did not come here to conquer anyone. We came here to say that we are ready to be part of this galaxy. We will trade with you. We will learn from you. We will help you when you need help. But we will never kneel, not to the Valorians, not to anyone. He looked directly at the section where the Valorian delegates sat in angry silence. If you attack us, we will fight back. If you try to enslave us, we will break our chains. If you kill us, we will make you pay a price so high that your children will remember it forever. That is who we are. That is what being human means. The chamber erupted in noise. Some delegates shouted in anger. Others made sounds of approval. A few representatives from long-oppressed worlds stood up and made gestures of respect toward Jake. When the noise finally died down, an ancient being at the head of the council spoke. Its voice was like wind through leaves. You speak boldly for a young species. What do you want from us? Jake thought about the question. What did humanity want? Safety? Power? Revenge? No. Something simpler than that. We want to be left alone to live in peace. But we also want to help others who cannot help themselves. The Valorian Empire has taken freedom from many worlds. We know what that feels like now. We will stand with anyone who wants to be free. More noise, more arguments. But Jake could see that something had changed. The galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. 1 year later, Jake finally went home. Ridgemont had been rebuilt. New houses stood where ruins had been. The lake was clean again. Children played in streets that had once been battlefields. Chloe was waiting for him at the edge of town. She had grown taller in the year he had been away. Her eyes were older than they should have been, but her smile was still the same. "Did you save the galaxy?" she asked. Jake laughed and hugged her tight. "I just talked to some people. That is all." Mom would have been proud of you. He felt tears in his eyes, but did not let them fall. "I know, sweetheart. I know." They walked together to the lake. Jake took out the old fishing rod he had kept all through the war. He showed Chloe how to cast her line, just like he had on the day everything changed. "Dad?" Chloe said as they sat watching the water. "Yes? Are they going to come back? The aliens?" Jake thought about the Galactic Council. He thought about the rebellions starting on distant worlds. He thought about all the changes that were coming. "Maybe, but if they do, we will be ready. We always are." Chloe nodded and smiled. She was not afraid. She was human. She had been born on a world that never stopped trying to kill her, and she had survived, just like her father. Just like all the billions of humans who called that small blue planet home. They were the children of hell, and they were just getting started. High Admiral Vorath stood on the bridge of his damaged flagship and watched Earth grow smaller in the viewscreen. His scales had turned gray with shame. His career was finished. His empire had suffered its first defeat in 10,000 years, all because of humans, all because of one small planet that nobody should have been able to survive. He gave the order to retreat, and the remnants of the great Valorian invasion force limped away into the darkness between stars. On Earth, as the sun rose over Ridgemont, people emerged from hiding and looked up at the sky. The aliens were gone. They had won. We need help from somewhere. He looked out the small window at the stars above. Somewhere up there, Valorian warships waited to destroy them. Somewhere up there, the rest of the galaxy watched and wondered what would happen to the strange little world called Earth. Jake did not know what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. He would never stop fighting. Not until the last alien ship left his sky. Not until his daughter could walk in the sunlight without fear. That was the human way. And that was why they would win. High Admiral Vorath received the reports from the surface with growing concern. The invasion was not going as planned. His soldiers were being killed by primitive weapons. The natives refused to surrender. The 3-day campaign was turning into something much longer and much bloodier. "What are these creatures?" he asked Science Officer Thalia. She looked at him with her flickering skin and spoke words that he would never forget. "They are humans, Admiral, and I believe we have made a terrible mistake coming here. The humans were not like other species. They had not become weak living on a gentle world. They had been forged by fire and storm and death. They were survivors of a planet that tried to kill them every single day. They were the children of hell, and they were about to show the galaxy what that meant."